Police officers of Reddit, have you ever had an all-units call, and if so, what happened? Story 1. Former military police here. Air Force Security Forces, to be specific. I was patrolling base housing doing some LE training. I had been on station less than a year, and we heard a gunshot. We called it in immediately, and started heading in the direction we heard it from. Those houses were duplexes, and the neighbors called it in as well. BDOC, dispatch, sent us, another police unit, and then the entire external response force. This was on a nuke base, so even things that don't actually have any impact on the nuclear mission totally have an impact on the nuclear mission. We had 19 total people on scene within about 3 minutes. As the first ones on scene, my post leader and I were already at the door when the rest of them showed up. I was thankful for them showing up when they did, because we were about to breach the door and go in just the two of us. We were told to hold for 30 seconds while the RF team got set up. Now we had a full stack and breaching equipment. I made a fist and thumped my helmet, signaling the breacher, who came up with his Halligan tool. My leader was number 2 in the stack, so she had to throw the flashbang. One of the RF guys passed it up from somewhere in the back of the stack, and as soon as the breacher had the door open, she tossed it in. All it did was scare the shit out of the dog. Only the husband was home, as his wife was deployed. He was sitting in the dining room on a chair with an SKS in his lap. I was maybe a pound or so of pressure away from pulling the trigger on my rifle when I realized that this dude's head was not fully intact. The SKS was only in his lap because the sling got caught on his arm after he pulled the trigger. As we cleared out the rest of the house, per procedure, I had my non-firing hand basically stuffed in my mouth to stop myself from puking. The dude's wife had sent him pictures and video of her cheating on him multiple times and telling him she wanted a divorce. He thought there was no other way out, so he shot himself. The only good news from that day is that we actually had picture and video evidence to use to charge her with adultery. I, like an Air Force version of the FBI, pulled her out of her deployment and got her back on station, and we charged her with everything we could, including Articles 92, 107, 125, which covers sodomy, and 134. She was stripped of all rank, forfeited all pay, went to confinement, and was dishonorably discharged after her 11 years of service. Story 2. Former cop here. The all-units call was basically a riot at a large nightclub in a very rough area of the neighboring city. Once things were finally calmed down and the dozen or so people were taken away and my boss wanted us all back in our city, I was amazed at not only how many cops showed up, but from counties and towns I had never heard of before. I looked up a few at the end of shift and some came from an hour plus away. Story 3. 25 years ago, in a smallish rural town, my dad was a beat cop on patrol. My cat brings in a live mouse and is playing with it in the kitchen, and my mom is deathly afraid of rodents. So she calls dispatch and tells them my dad needs to come home. Dispatch gets on the line and tells my dad to switch to a secured line. There's an emergency at home. My dad's driving home to take care of the issue when all of the cops, probably like 4 of my small town on patrol, come with sirens and lights blazing on my house because all they heard was there was an emergency at my dad's house. My mother was mortified. Story 4 was a military police officer on a rather large base. I was getting off shift and being transported back to my barracks by the guys coming on shift so I could check in my weapon. Suddenly we got a call for all units to respond to a section of base housing. A military wife was having an affair with another soldier while her husband was on deployment. Supposedly the husband was due to return soon, so she tried to break it off with the other guy. He responded by stabbing her several times. My team leader and I searched the tree line with our weapons drawn, cause he's armed and it's dark outside, you know. I actually passed the guy with my team leader a few yards behind me and suddenly he comes out saying, "You're looking for me."
Scared the shit out of me!
My team leader covered him while I went in for the handcuffing, making sure that I had my knee firmly planted in between his shoulder blades and thoroughly covering his upper torso into the muddy terrain. Not sure what happened after that. He was taken to a holding cell by another squad and I gotta go home. Ended up getting transferred from that base a few months later, but I know the wife survived the wounds. Story 5. I got run over by someone fleeing the scene of an incident that they weren't involved in. He just got scared and apparently had a gun on him. I was out of my car talking to the person who called and my partner was trying to stop the person who was really called on, so he didn't even see me get hit. No one knew I got hit or where I was because my radio went flying. Luckily, there were a lot of witnesses who called 911 and found my radio. I confused the dispatcher because I was in so much shock that I came over the radio talking like I normally do, but I was bleeding badly from my head and broke my leg. I didn't feel the pain for about 2 hours, so I had that call come out because of me. I'm also pretty sure a policy got made because of me too. Story 6. Not an officer, but I'll share one of my buddies. He was an older gent who has passed on now, but if Reddit had been a thing when he was younger, this would have been a top of the TIFU subreddit. When he was still new, he worked in a larger city. They had just gotten the shoulder mics. You know, the ones every cop has now mounted up by their mouth so they can call in easier? When new to them, they wore the cord in front of their shirts, always in the damn way, and great handles when people wanted to wrestle. Jimmy was called one night to a bar brawl. He strolled into the bedlam almost over. He was a rookie, always getting the shit detail, so he was becoming famous among his department for ruining his uniforms, to the point he was having to come out of pocket to replace them. He walked into a vet telling him to cuff everyone still here. They'll sort them out later. Jimmy grabs the closest guy. They struggle a little and go down to the ground. As they do, Jimmy splits his pants clean up the backside. Knowing he's going to be the butt of jokes anyway, he turns his head to announce to the other officers, "Well, that's another uniform down," and keys his mic. Base hears uniform down. So does everyone else in the county. The radio explodes with chatter, but the 3 cops at the bar already have their hands full, so they turn down their radios. Base decided to roll everything with lights to the scene. Jimmy said they were glad of the help when the first few cars rolled up, but they just kept coming. He was known as Jack the Radio Ripper till he transferred. Minor reprimand, and he still had to pay for the pants. Story 7 former Royal Canadian Mounted Police here in a small tourist town. Was working on a regular midweek day shift when we received a dispatched call for a bomb threat in the industrial commercial sector of the town. We all went there, called in the bomb squad, the dogs, got people out of the area, and so on. We were doing the roadside when we got another call that the local bank's silent alarm was turned on. Now, we are in Canada, in a tourist town. Things are usually relatively calm. But this was absolutely chaotic. We got the all-unit call. They called our neighboring detachment to help. We all split and headed to the bank. We arrived, around 20-some patrol cars all around, there to see all the bank employees bound and gagged, smoke everywhere from smoke bombs. We realized very quickly that the bomb threat was a diversion. We immediately got a BO be on the lookout, for the 3 males, identified by the bank staff, including a former bank employee. We got the BOLO out to CPIC Canadian Police Information Center, got word to airports and border crossings. We managed to catch 2/3 of the guys. The last one flew back to his home country, was in Canada on a student visa. We remained on high alert for days after this, looking for the 3rd guy. Canadian authorities worked with their colleagues from the other guy's country to get him extradited almost a year later. In the end, as I recall, about 130K were missing and never recovered. For most of us, it was the first time we had a bomb threat and/or a robbery. First time we were guarding an area, expecting to be shot at from an unknown location. The robbers were reported to have AK-47 type looking weapons. Story 8 years ago. Friend of mine was a dispatcher for the county. He covered sheriff, EMS and fire communications, and also worked communicating with other agencies as well. From the state troopers, he got some sort of text communication. Not a phone text, this was before that was a thing. And it referred to an accident with injuries at the intersection of I-40 and Business 85. Something along the lines of collision I-40 bus 85 injuries involved. The way it was abbreviated and written made him misread it. Instead of an accident at 85 Business, he thought there was a bus collision on I-40, with 85 people injured. He dispatched every damn fire truck and ambulance the county had. They showed up and it's a 2-car wreck with minor injuries. Story 9. So, I interned at the local PD at a time when all stations received new radio devices. The new devices looked a bit like old cell phones and had a bright orange panic button on top. It was meant for situations where, e.g., a single police officer was attacked and needed help. Pushing that button resulted in all communication on the standard Channel 1 being turned to one-way communication only. So all units would listen to what's going on wherever the panic button was pressed, and an automatic all-free units call. All other units had to switch to the much weaker Channel 2 to communicate, but Channel 2 only allowed one device to speak. To disable the panic mode, you had to push the bright orange button in a certain way. Think of holding it for 3 seconds followed by 4 quick pushes. It could not be done remotely. This happened in a rather large city where some police stations are closed at night, usually the ones in the suburbs where few calls come in. That night, an older police officer closed down the remotest station in the suburbs and decided to shut off the radio devices. You guessed it, he pushed the panic button on top because he thought that's where the devices were to be turned on and off, without realizing what he did. He locked the station and went home. Since it was the first day of using the new radio devices, quite a few officers were unsure how to turn to Channel 2. Basically, all communication was blocked. Cue panic everywhere with frantic cell phone calls to dispatch, and dispatch trying to figure out who closed that station, and thus had one of the only keys to open it, so the panic mode could be disabled. This unintentional all units call turned into an actual no units can call, though quite a few units were busy trying to resolve the situation. Story 10 buddies first day on the phone at a fire station in an international airport. Airliner detects a fire in the rear of the generator. They are coming in hot and need assistance immediately. Buddy decides a major airliner incident is imminent. Calls the city fire department, which might have 80 fire stations. They all send every unit expecting complete mayhem. Airplane landed safely. False alarm. About 200 fire trucks are lined up for miles outside the airport. No one was able to get in because the gate was closed. My rookie friend botched his all units call. Story 11, not a cop, but a former practicing journalist, current PR person. Got a text about a shooting. Turns out a cop made a stop. Got shot in the neck by the passenger. Killed the passenger and shot the driver. Driver got away. Cops from the 2 adjoining cities came. Sheriff's deputies, airport police, and university police all came out in under 3 minutes. About 150 cops. Within 30 minutes, marshals, FBI, and ATF were there as well. Largest response I've ever seen. There were rounds that had been fired into the buildings surrounding the area. It was a mess. I was in the wrong place at the right time, I guess. Last story I ever did. Made the full-time switch to PR. Story 12 usually about once a month or so. We're taught that if you need backup, if shits hits the fan, call it in and worry about how many people will come later. A unit was on patrol 2 weeks ago, and some guy just started shooting at him. All the unit got out was 34th and 1033 I'm taking fire. 1033 being the code for sending the cavalry officer in need of assistance. It all ended fine. We caught the guy. No injuries. But you better believe every officer in our area dropped what they were doing and went. Another recent one, a mini riot broke out at a candle vigil for a murder victim. An officer stepped in alone, bad move, to stop the fight, and started getting his ass handed to him. All he said was Potomac 1033, but it worked. We came in, dispersed the crowd, and got out. Story 13. I was doing a ride along in college in a fairly small city in Georgia when we got an all-available units call. The address came in, the lights and siren went on, and we were hauling ass at about 120 miles per hour across town. I had no idea where we were headed until we got there. The only thing the officer said to me was, "No matter what happens, stay in the fucking car. If you see anyone with a gun, call it out on the radio like this." Showed me. If any of us get shot, call it in and stay in the car. Then, he took a deep breath, calmly got out of the car, and took off at a sprint towards a 40-person melee in front of the only strip club in town. We were the first car there. Over the course of the next 30 seconds, officers arrived and kept coming until they outnumbered the people fighting. The officer I was riding with was completely on his own for a 10-second eternity, and was able to rip about 10 people apart from fighting before backup arrived. It was the single bravest and most humbling thing I've ever seen with my own eyes. When it was all over, he got back in the car with 3 drunk and beaten up dudes in the back, turned to me and said, "So when are you gonna sign up?" I've got a couple more stories from that summer doing ride-alongs if anyone wants to hear. Story 14. At 2 p.m., while counting the minutes, a call comes out on the radio. "Central Control, activate IMS, Housing Unit 3. Inmate is refusing to cuff up and has broken the fire sprinklers in his cell. Requesting A-team response, put B-team on standby." IMS is code for locking down everything. When you hear an IMS call, that means every inmate that is not in a cell must be secured. It's serious shit because when an event like this occurs, other officers must leave their respective posts to assist, which means officers that remain on their units, while their counterparts assist, are now even more outnumbered, and that can easily spiral out of control. In short, any event like this is a serious security threat. In this case, Max was put on lockdown while the rest of the institution kept about their business. Interesting thing is, when an IMS comes out for Max, the collective prison sphincter cinches up a bit because Max is where the real violent shit goes down. An A-team is always the first to respond. But the kicker with this one was the command to put the B-team on standby. This means shit has hit the fan and anyone not immediately supervising inmates would be required to respond if so commanded. A B-team deployment to Max would send the rest of the 7,000-bed institution into a complete lockdown. All doctor appointments, visits, movement throughout the buildings is completely locked down. You'd hear Sallyport doors slamming shut everywhere. Really cool to experience it, honestly. There's also CD and E teams, if those were ever called. Well, it shouldn't ever get to that point. Anyway, being the new guy, I was elected to respond. When I arrived at the briefing area, we were immediately ordered to put on our riot gear and biohazard coveralls. Other officers helped us suit up so no skin was exposed. Only being a few weeks out of the academy, I did shit myself. This was not only my first A-team response, but it was also a biohazard. Blood, semen, urine, shit. Which is it, Sergeant? All of them. I don't believe in Jesus, but I did briefly for that moment. When we were escorted onto the unit, it was a war zone. The entire housing unit was full of gas, fire alarms blaring, red lights flashing everywhere. Even though we had our gas masks on, it didn't help as we had to put them on in a hurry. The first responding officers had to go in without any protective gear. The motherfucker was still in his cell. He had been gassed, maced, and hosed. He was unrelenting. I thought, he's gotta be on PCP. Then I remembered this is Max. Nothing gets in or out. The inmate was ass naked, covered in God knows what, screaming unintelligibly. He was bleeding from his arms due to having bitten full chunks out of them. His cell was watered down from the sprinklers and from getting sprayed with any number of OC variants. The best part? This man, in all his naked splendor and rage, was 120% erect. The fullest boner you've ever seen. Something deep inside his primordial mind had gotten irrevocably turned on through all this. Even his penis being exposed to OC spray did nothing to stop it. We stack up in a line. For cell breaches, 6 of us would line up in a stick. The guy on point always had the shield. 2 to 5 had the cuffs. The last guy was the moderator. He or she would give the inmate a final opportunity to comply because the pain was fucking coming. Inmate, this is your last opportunity to approach the door and cuff up. Do you comply? Of course not. When this inmate saw us line up, however, something changed, as if the Holy Spirit spoke to him. He cuffed up, was dragged out of his cell, still erect BTW, and thrown into a shower. I didn't even get to breach the cell. The sight of 6 officers in full riot gear lining up outside your door, and you knowing full well they're gonna find a way to all fit in your cell in less than 3 seconds, can be a really humbling experience. Story 15. My father was a highway federal officer, Federal de Caminos, rough translation, here in Mexico. They were armed with light machine guns of standard caliber because shit goes real against the cartels here in the northern border. But it's so big and spaced out you have to deal with it yourself, because the nearest unit can be 1 hour away and they have reinforced trucks. Anyway, he once told me that he encountered a convoy of 3 Humvees while he was on the side of the road. Relatively hidden. He opened fire at the first Humvee's tires, and it loses control. The other 2 break, and like 12 dudes with Kalashnikovs come out to fire in random directions. They probably didn't saw where they got shot from. And my father lays down suppressing fire on them until the 2 units come from each side of the road from a relatively nearby station to arrest what's left of them. Story 16. A friend of mine was a K9 cop with a small local police department. He was a solid guy, but by his own admission, wasn't the brightest. As an example, he couldn't learn the German commands for the dog, so they had to teach the dog English. Anyway, one day an all-call, or whatever it's called, came in. It was regarding a shooting, which is rare here. My friend was taking a dump at the time, and his dog was in his SUV K9 mobile. The cops went running out and jumped in whatever car was available. The K9 was in the back seat. When some other cop jumped in the SUV, the K9 got spooked and clamped down on the cop's neck. He freaked out and started screaming into his radio. All the other cops thought he'd arrived at the scene and been shot. My friend, hearing on the radio and knowing how his dog acts, ran out of the bathroom pulling his pants up. Havoc ensued. If I were a cop, I'd want to work for a small police department. Story 17 obligatory, not a cop. But I once got an all-unit call to my house. Backstory. My mom was dating a meth head and everyone knew who he was. And our address. I was around 15 and one night he went off the rails and was beating the shit out of my mom. I got involved just in time to see him swing at my sister, who was 7 at the time. I ran for the phone and called it in. I got as far as the address when he grabbed me by the neck and threw me. Well, the dispatcher heard my garbled yelp and called it in as a possible homicide in progress. That combined with his reputation sent every single cop in the surrounding jurisdictions flying our way. By the end of it, I think there were 20+ police officers at our house. I ended up hitting him with my mom's cast iron skillet to keep him there just as the first officer showed up. He was super cool about it and pretended he didn't see a thing. It was a terrible night and my mom was mad at me for months. But man, you don't fuck with my little sister. Story 18. I served in West Belfast, Northern Ireland. Due to the high threat level in my division, we would patrol in 2 armored Land Rovers, each with minimum 3 armed officers, one of which would have an assault rifle or SMG. Basically, we could handle most scenarios. One day, however, our vehicle was in an intentional head-on collision with a stolen car, as it was driving towards local children playing in the street. This resulted in our front wheel arch bending to the point the vehicle could travel no more. In a few minutes, the community we were there to protect turned against us. It was like Black Hawk. A few hundred people came out of the woodwork when they realized we were an easy target. Petrol bombs and bricks rained on top of us as we attempted to pursue the car thief on foot. We jumped in the back of our vehicle and called for assistance. In under 5 minutes, a fleet of approximately 5 to 6 armored Land Rovers appeared from the neighboring division and drove the crowd back. They managed to tow us to safety and we lived to get bricked another day. Story 19. My uncle told me a story once about getting called on a code swordfish, which is a bit more serious than just all units. There was this coked up 6 feet something huge guy who had just shot up a liquor store and was tearing down the interstate. He told us there were probably about 15 cop cars already tailing him when he caught up, with 2 state troopers leading. When he got onto the interstate, he was practically right next to the guy. They ran his car off the road and the dude jumped out while it's still moving and ran across the interstate. He jumps over the guardrail and falls about 10 feet to the other side of the interstate, runs across that into the woods. The 2 state troopers got out as soon as they saw him running and took off after him with my uncle not far behind. One of them didn't realize how far the fall was and broke his ankle. The other chased down the guy. By the time my uncle got there, the other state trooper was staggered and about to pass out from how hard his ass got kicked. My uncle, without breaking his sprint, charged the guy and threw the heaviest haymaker he could. The guy went out immediately. Later, they had to go to the hospital to file reports since they had to take the guy in for the drug stuff. My uncle was sitting on a chair with his hat over his hand in his lap. The doctor comes in and asks him how big of a flashlight did he hit the dude with. My uncle just lifts his hat and shows his bruised and swollen hand. Apparently, he hit the guy so hard it fractured his temple and very nearly killed him. Story 20, our calls are a little different. Mostly rescues, but we'll sometimes fall in with the local police departments. Once got called for a dirt bike accident on a trail. Story starts out with kids broken up badly, lost, and can't get out of the trail. It's a 7-mile trail and only wide enough for 1 ATV to get through at a time. All traffic goes one way. None of us live that way, so none of us have a bike with us. And I'm the only one who's ridden the trail. I'm headed to the trailhead while I'm listening to the radio traffic. Thinking to myself, you dumb motherfuckers. It's going to be at least 4 hours before we find and drag this kid out of there. Why the hell are you calling in the helicopter? There is no landing zone and they aren't going to wait 4+ hours for you. Local search and rescue fucking shit up. They'll be on IV fluids within the hour. Helicopters fly through, then leaves. Like a big surprise there. Word gets out that another group riding got the kid and are taking him to the highway. Group actually rides through to the end of the trailhead. Kids are fine. Nothing was broken but his bike. He had earbuds on inside his helmet. When he went down, he hit his head hard enough to break off both of the earbuds inside his ears. And I'll never wear earbuds inside my helmet. I was off for this one, but the original call is too good. Dispatch calls saying there's an alligator eating a person on the river. This is pretty big, and one of our worst fears. It'll impact how we manage alligators from then on. We've got to get out there, catch and kill a 12-foot alligator and recover a body that no one's reported missing. So they all scramble to get a boat in the water before this thing leaves and goes to sleep for 2 weeks with a full belly, and the half-eaten body sinks, and no amount of dragging or side sonar will help find it in the flooded river. Other agencies are getting out there too. They find the alligator. It's eating a dog. So now these guys are cutting up about it. And out of nowhere they notice a freaking body floating in the river. Turns out some guy ran from highway patrol days before, tried to cross the river, drowned, and happened to float up at exactly the right time. I did get to catch the dog eater though. Fucker made the paper. In all honesty, I think the couple who originally made the call accidentally drowned their pet when the river flooded, and the alligator found the carcass later. They were guilt-ridden and needed a scapegoat for their ignorance. And 2 alligators died because of it. Because of the media, we were forced to remove one. We knew there's no realistic way to get the one who actually ate the dog, so we just had the trapper set a line and remove the first gator over 8 feet that took the bait. As soon as you remove one, another shows up, so this couple sees another big gator and raises hell that we didn't catch the right one. So we set a line for the next one. Comes out just over 11 feet. We're like, for the love of God, just don't see another alligator, people. In between these two, I was out with a partner looking for the dog killer. We mostly hooked them on rod and reel. Based on the pictures and location we found it, we hooked into it, and knew immediately that we would never catch it. This fucker pulled an 18-foot boat up a flooded river like it was soggy newspaper. Had us dipping so low we were worried about capsizing. Swam under a log and we kept fighting till the line finally broke. After being under for well over 45 minutes, this thing pops up like 15 feet from us and crawls up onto a fallen tree and sandbar. Starts huffing, trying to get some oxygen back. We're just stunned staring at it like we just pissed off the Lake Placid monster and it's coming for revenge. My partner's been doing this for many years, and he says this is the largest gator he's ever seen. The thing was over 13 feet and was still partially submerged. Coloration matched the picture of the dog eater better. This was it, and he's staying on this planet for a while longer.